Hello, my friends. Thanks for joining me again for another week of Spiritism, a closer look. As you always know, we do this every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and you're following us here, right here on Kardec Radio. I'm Luiz Lima, hosting the program tonight. And tonight, we're going to take a closer look at the Spiritist philosophy. Uh, Spiritism is something uh, usually hard to define in one phrase, in a few words. However, that's not the purpose tonight. We are going to take a look at how Spiritism is this philosophical body of knowledge that can teach us great things about being better people, having a better life, and so on. I don't know if it ever happened to you, but to me, it has happened several times when somebody, most of them non-spiritists, they're usually coming from a different belief system, or they're simply friends and colleagues. So we spiritists usually, I mean, not usually, but we do hear people coming to us telling us something like this: "You guys, you spiritists, you like to suffer." We hear this a lot, and when you starts to go to a spiritist center, when you start, in your first steps towards spiritism, you're gonna hear that spiritism brings consolation. So we have a tremendous clash here, because how could spiritism spiritists like to suffer, at the same time spiritism brings consolation? It's kind of, they don't get along well. So why does that happen? It happens because people who says that spiritists like me, and hopefully like you, they like to suffer. Usually it's because they do not understand, at least at its full length, what spiritism is, what's behind it, and what's its clear purpose. So it makes it very difficult for these people to understand us. So they will say things like this. And in order to kind of put things in perspective, well, I think we need to go to the very beginning. How does Spiritism start? So we can pick up a starting point, which is Allan Kardec, the codifier of Spiritism, had been invited. That was in 1854. The first Spiritist book was published in 1857. So 3 years before the first book, or better saying, the introduction of Spiritism to the world, 3 years before that, Allan Kardec was invited by a close friend. He was Mr. Fortier. He was his friend for like 25 years, very long time. So he invited Allan Kardec to see these manifestations or phenomena that was taking place throughout Europe. He was living in Paris, so it also happened in Paris. So they had these places where people would, just gather to see some strange phenomena. Desks flying, chairs, turning by themselves and stuff like that. So Allan Kardec goes back to this friend, 25 years of friendship. You don't want to lose it like that, right? So Allan Kardec tells him, you know, come on, I'm not going to believe this thing. You know me, I'm very pragmatic, a very technical oriented mind, thought, or thinking process. I'm not going to go to this. Oh, okay. So this guy, Mr. Fortier, continues going to these manifestations and these phenomena. 2 years later, actually 1 year later, another very good friend, also friends for 25, 30 years, Mr. Carlotti. Mr. Carlotti goes to him and says, oh, I've been, going to these places. Do you want to see and come and see? And he says, no, I have another friend that already invited me. I'm not going to believe this thing. So 6 months later, both of these friends are on a party that Allan Kardec is invited to. So they all gather in this party, the three of them, and the two friends says, "You gotta come and see." So at one point he said, "Well, come on, these guys are friends for 25, 30 years. I don't want to lose the friendship, so I'm just gonna go and that was it. It's gonna be a one-time deal. I'll just go as a friend, really, not for myself, but to satisfy these friends of mine." So anyway, he goes to these manifestations and he sees these desks flying, chairs turning, and so, and he goes like, "Come on, there's got to be something here. That's some, magician operating this thing." So he goes around, nothing is found. He goes to more of these meetings or these gatherings, and he starts to, like, I gotta have better answers because desks cannot turn or fly by themselves, and chairs cannot turn, and furniture cannot move around without somebody pushing or pulling. So at one point he starts going to what we call today the mediumistic meetings, where mediums were gathered receiving information, and he starts to attend, as a very shy person, right down on his corner. Let me just see what's going on here. So he starts seeing this session, if you will, of questions and answers. These mediums were asking questions, and the answer was coming through, mediumistically through them. So Allan Kardec said, "I want to ask this," and people in the room would ask for him, and he was there watching the thing. At one point, somebody goes to him and says, "Instead of of you asking us these questions, and if so we can ask again to the spirits, why don't you ask yourself directly?" And he starts doing that, and the answers start to come. With that, he starts gathering knowledge about the spirit world. We could say some spiritual knowledge, more and more and more. And because he was a very pragmatic guy, very thinking process of a scientist, very logical in his questioning, he would just go, my question number two had to do with your answer to my question number one, and so on and so on, which is the very basic concept of a philosophy, right? Philosophy is exactly that: questions and answers. I ask you something, you answer me, and I'll ask you a second question based on your answer. You answer me again, you're going to get a third question from me based on the first two answers, and so on and on. So he was gathering all these questions, and they were writing down, and he started compiling these uh, tons of papers that he was coming back with from this mediumistic meetings, and he starts go digging in and asking more questions. And at a certain point, he kind of the thing kind of clicks, and the spirits tell him what you're getting from. Basically, that's what they say, right? What you're getting from us are answers to your questions about the spirit life, life after death, and stuff like that. However, this is a philosophy. We are teaching you a philosophy. What is a philosophy? It's a way of living. So we're teaching you a way of living. However, there's a moral of reference that you need to abide to. Because think about this: you can have a philosophy that, it's a life philosophy. I want to do this and this and this. You can have some logic behind it. Nothing wrong with that. However, if you don't have moral standards or morality attached to it, it can be problematic. Because I want to do, for example, here's an idea. I want to do this particular thing, and I want to be the best of all. I can do my very best, and my very best is not enough to make me the best. There are people that are better than me on this particular thing that I want to do, whatever it is. So if there's no morality attached, I could think of being the very best by eliminating those who are better than me. and that would be a problem. So the spirits tell, through the answers, they will tell Allan Kardec there's a moral of reference. And so he asks, where's the moral of reference? Who should we follow? And they answer to him, you got to follow Jesus. That he came to teach us the moral of reference. That's what everything is based on. With that, you see, this is years of questioning and answering these mediumistic meetings that he's going through. I'm just telling you in a couple of minutes. So with that, he understands that all of this is to make us better. It's for us to understand the need for our personal moral transformation. And as a consequence, we are going to be spirits. If we follow all of this, we are going to be spirits who will be more advanced than we are today. That's the concept of spiritual evolution. So all of these things, all of these sequence of things that I'm telling you here, they only make sense if you believe in a few things. Otherwise, the whole thing dismantles because it's a sequence of things. You will dismantle completely if you don't believe in what we call the pillars of Spiritism. And here are five of them. Number one, existence of God. Because if you don't believe in God, all of this process doesn't make sense because God is behind everything. Now, very important, when we say in Spiritism that one of the pillars is the existence of God, please let me make you very clear. Existence of God, God according to Spiritism, to the Spiritist definition. Because the word God does not mean the same thing for all belief systems. It will be different depending on the belief system. So you cannot bring the definition of God from one certain belief system and try to understand all of this under Spiritism because it's not going to work. It is God according to the Spiritist definition, which, by the way, is question number one of the Spirit's book. If you understand in a different belief system, if you try to import the concept from a different belief system, it's going to be trouble. You're not going to understand. Something in the scheme of things is going to fail and it's not going to make sense to you. So that's number one. Number two, immortality of the soul. If you don't believe in immortality of the soul, how are you going to believe that one day there were, and there still are, manifestations? Things, apparently inert matter taking actions. It's got to be some intelligence behind it because matter is matter, inert. It doesn't have any ability to do anything. So if you don't believe in the immortality of the soul, meaning those who died, they are beyond death, but they're still living and creating all of this. If you don't believe that, this will not make sense to you. Number three, communicability of spirits. If you don't believe this, you cannot believe in the mediumistic meetings where all these answers came from. It wouldn't make sense to you. Or you're going to like and believe some of the answers, not all of them. So you're going to say, oh, I like this thing, but that one answer, no. I'm going to exclude that one. You can't do this. It doesn't make sense. Number four, the concept of reincarnation, because if you don't believe in the concept of reincarnation, you cannot understand fully in all its possibilities moral transformation, that we cannot simply snap the fingers and become Jesus, for example. No, you have to understand it's a process and it requires stages and phases, each one of them being a different lifetime, a different reincarnation. And finally, you have to believe in spiritual evolution, which is the whole goal of things here. If you don't believe that, if you don't believe in spiritual evolution, why is that all being said. It wouldn't even make sense. So that's in a very few words, very just 10 minutes here about the Spiritist philosophy. So all of these things, all of this process that I briefly spoke about, it was compiled. All these answers were compiled and published in the first Spiritist book, the Spirit's book, first edition, like I said in the beginning, 1857. 1857 has 501 questions. The second edition and all the editions after that, second edition published in March 1860, that has 1,019 questions. So it's almost double the number of questions of the first edition. So the Spirit's book, when you get the Spirit's book, at the very end, Allan Kardec puts a chapter which he calls, of course, conclusion. In this conclusion, what is the purpose of the conclusion of a book, for example, a book that teaches something? It's to summarize everything that was discussed, taught, mentioned, and summarized in a way, very briefly, but in a way that when you hear these when you read this conclusion, say, oh, this thing he's talking about is all of this and this and this. Oh, I remember going through this. That's the purpose of a conclusion of any book. So in the conclusion of the Spirit's book, Allan Kardec has a phrase which is very interesting. I'm going to read it to you. All of you who do not believe in anything beyond the material world should know that from the turning table that elicits your disdainful smiles, an entire science has emerged. Why is he using this expression, disdainful smiles? Because that was he did himself when he was first invited to see these turning tables and all of these things. So he said, behind all this has emerged a science. As well, he continues, as well as solutions to problems that no philosophy has ever been able to solve. And then you say, come on, hold on. There are millions, there were and there still are millions or several different philosophies. How come nobody ever solved what is being said here? Answer. Because if you need to solve problems, if you need to address problems, you need guidance, you need a reference. But you need a static reference. Your reference cannot change. That's why he's saying that the problems had not, other philosophies were not being able to solve, because if they ever used any sort of reference, they were not static. It's like justice. Justice for us, human justice, it changes along the way. The law that we have today, the laws that we have today are not the same we had 500 years ago. Some of them wouldn't even make sense today. And the laws that we are going to have in 300 years from now are not going to be the same we have today, because it evolves. It has to evolve. Society has to evolve. But not philosophy. You have to have static references. They cannot change. Otherwise, your philosophy is a moving target. You never get to it. You never understand. You never fully live this philosophy. It wouldn't make sense. So that solid static reference, like I said before, is the moral brought to us by Jesus. That is our moral of reference. And then in the conclusion of the Spirit's book, Allan Kardec asks two questions, and he is the one to provide the answers himself. And these are questions that he was getting from people around him after the publication of the first edition, because this is on the second edition. So one of the questions was this: if the morality of the spirits is the same morality of the gospel, and it is, what purpose does Spiritism serve? The question makes a lot of sense, right? So if you tell me the moral of reference is Jesus, and the gospel uses the same reference, what good is Spiritism for? The question has, it has a reason for that. So Allan Kardec is going to answer to us. Answer: Spiritism renders intelligible and patent certain truths that have only been taught under allegorical form. Meaning, we need to extract from the gospel the true teachings, and the allegories, they will be set aside. We need to get to the bottom of this thing. So, Spiritism is not only going to mention the teachings of Jesus because they are in the gospel, but it's going to explain at length. I usually say this, and I say it all the time. If you heard me saying this, please forgive me. Take, for example, from Moses, one of the Ten Commandments, don't kill. We had to have discipline. Moses himself, by the way, he had to come up with disciplinary laws to reinforce the idea of don't kill. So, for example, a disciplinary law could be don't kill, but if you kill, you go to jail. For example, so you can think about it. Should I really kill somebody or not? Because I'm going to go to jail. See, so these are laws. These are social laws or disciplinary laws that will address one of these values that were given to us. Now, Spiritism takes that and explains why. Why should I not kill? Not because you go to jail. It's layer number 3. So don't kill, you go to jail, don't kill, you go to jail, and it's going to be another problem, which, because life goes on. That's why the concept of reincarnation is important, and it's one of the pillars in Spiritism. So Spiritism explains, details all of that. So that's one question that Allan Kardec was getting. And the second question he was getting from people around him was, why is Christ's morality practiced so little? Right? And it reminds me of Gandhi, right? Gandhi used to say, one thing that I do not understand in Christians is why they don't follow Christ. He used to say that all the time, openly. So why his morals or why Christ's morality is not practiced as it should? And the answer is because the practice was not assimilated. You learn something sometimes, and you have to go through a process to internalize that, to really internalize that teaching and really learn once and for all. And that happens in academic school, in a lot of things in life. So the practice was not assimilated. Spiritism comes to teach it with greater precision and its applicable utility. So by doing this, you're not only making a speech or discoursing out there. Well, we saw Jesus not teaching in verbal, in words only, but in on site, right, live with the apostles and everybody around him. So there's something in Spiritism that sets Spiritism apart from the other philosophies. And in the conclusion of the Spirit's book, Allan Kardec says, it would be very erroneous to believe that the power of Spiritism arises from the practice of material manifestations. Those flying desks and everything. Its power, the power of Spiritism, is in its philosophy, in the appeal it makes to reason and common sense. Spiritism is very strong in its base because it's a philosophy and it's not any philosophy. It appeals for reason and common sense, but it has a guidance, a moral of reference. And that makes all the difference. So Spiritism is based on a philosophy, but this philosophy contains a moral component, the moral of reference brought to us by Jesus. What is this moral going to do to make us better? First, it's going to uh, put new meaning to words that were used by the church. For example, some of the words. We're not going to go through the concept. That's not the case today. We're going to do this on another program. But for example, some words here that had to be, uh, uh, the meaning had to be understood in a different way. God, hell, heaven, good, evil, uh, punishment, suffering, pain. All of these things have a meaning in Spiritism because it is a philosophy based on a moral reference that are slightly or sometimes radically different from the belief system dominating at the time Spiritism came about. So, the essence of Spiritism, the essence of Spiritism is the improvement of mankind, spiritual, moral evolution. That's the core of Spiritism, the essence of Spiritism. And like I said in the beginning, it is a philosophy that uses several elements, all based on a moral of reference brought to us by Jesus. So some of the concepts that we mentioned, I just mentioned that had to be understood differently than before: God, punishment, pain, and so we're going to address these in the upcoming programs in the next few weeks. So stay tuned. Join us here every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be here. Spiritism, a closer look. Be well, and I'll see you next time.